So it's been a couple years since Apple last updated the Mac Pro, and supposedly they're working on a new modular Mac Pro for 2018, but for now we get the iMac Pro. It's an all-in-one machine with server-grade hardware like Intel Xeon processors, ECC memory, 10GB Ethernet, and Radeon Pro Vega graphics. So today, we'll be taking a look at the performance, thermals, fan noise, and see how this thing holds up as a pro machine. So visually, it looks identical to the 27-inch iMac except for the new space gray color, which is the only color that it comes in. Aside from the color, the size and the dimensions are identical to the normal iMac. Now, Apple says the iMac and the iMac Pro's displays are identical, but some people have said that the iMac Pro looks slightly brighter. I don't have a 27-inch iMac to compare side by side, but for the most part, I don't think you're going to see much of a difference between this and the iMac's display. It's a 27-inch screen with a resolution of 5120 by 2880, 500 nits of brightness, and it also supports the P3 color gamut. If I had to nitpick on something, it would be that I would have liked to have seen a true 10-bit panel like on the 2017 MacBook Pros, but it does support dithering to reduce color banding. Aside from that minor detail, this is pretty much as you would expect. It gets way brighter than it needs, so most of the time I'll have this thing around 80 to 90% brightness. It's colorful and saturated, things look crazy sharp and detailed, and the 27-inch screen size is perfect for me. The speakers are also really good, especially for something that's built into an all-in-one computer. It's a pair of downward-facing stereo speakers that gets way louder than you're ever going to need, and by that I mean I'm already getting nervous pushing it past about 75% volume because I'm afraid my neighbors will complain, and there's also a pretty good amount of bass here. It's not overpowering, obviously, because these are built-in speakers, but they have enough bass to give it a warmer and fuller sounding audio. Obviously not going to replace like studio monitors or headphones, but they're pretty good for just casually listening to music or watching YouTube videos, which is totally what people are spending $5,000 for, obviously. Jokes aside though, they're about the same as the standard iMac. They get loud without any distortion, they're clear, they've got a solid amount of bass, and as far as built-in speakers are concerned, there's really not much you can criticize about. The performance, however, is where the iMac Pro really shines. The model I have here is just the base model with an 8-core Intel Xeon W 2145, 32 gigs of quad-channel memory, a 1TB SSD, and Vega Pro 56 graphics. There's actually quite a few upgrade options here on the iMac Pro, and if you max everything out, you're looking at a grand total of about $13,000 US, or about 16,000 Canadian dollars. I feel like for most people, you'll either be looking for that one step up from the maxed out iMac, so just be buying the baseline iMac Pro, or you want the absolute best performance available, so you're just going to buy every single upgrade available. Initial impressions for performance is really good. It handles 8K raw video like a champ, even with color correction, and for later titles, it's actually possible to game at 5K resolution. I'll be making separate videos checking out video editing performance with 8K RAW using Final Cut and Adobe Premiere Pro, as well as a video dedicated to gaming on the iMac Pro, so subscribe if you're interested in that, but even the base model handles video editing and gaming pretty well. So in Geekbench 4, we're getting 5100 for single core and 31,000 for the multi-core score, and in the OpenCL test, we're getting a score of 150,000 with the Vega 56. In Cinebench R15, we get a multi-core score of 1685 and 123 frames per second in the OpenGL test. Port selection is pretty good. On the back, you get a 10GB Ethernet port, 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, 4 USB-A ports, a combo headphone microphone jack, and an SDXC card slot. Unfortunately, there is no latch for easily upgrading the memory because that part has now been replaced with a single exhaust for the cooling. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the hardware used in the iMac Pro. The CPU inside is actually the Intel Xeon 2145 and not the 2140B that all these apps like Geekbench are showing. It has a TDP of 140 watts, and when I was mining Monero overnight for like 10 straight hours on 6 out of the 8 cores, it averaged around 84 degrees Celsius with about 86 watts for power usage. It's also not soldered onto the motherboard, so theoretically, it can be upgraded if you want it, but take this with a grain of salt because that's just from an earlier teardown video. There's no confirmations on whether you can actually upgrade the processor or not. The ECC memory is for sure upgradable, but if you plan on upgrading it yourself, you're going to need to buy a whole new set of 4 because no matter what configuration you get, all 4 slots are populated out of the box. The SSD is also not soldered on, and it's actually 2 separate SSDs in RAID 0, so again, theoretically, you could upgrade the storage yourself down the line. This one I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think the Vega 56 inside is the same Vega 56 that you see on places like Newegg, because the iMac Pro uses a Pro Vega card, not an RX Vega card. The compute units and stream processors are all the same, but the benchmarks are a fair bit less in the RX variants, 150,000 on the Pro versus about 176,000 on the RX Vega 56. Lastly, there's a new custom Apple-made processor called the T2, which is supposed to handle security with booting up the iMac Pro, the webcam, the microphones, and encrypting the SSD. There was also a leak for always-on Siri where you could activate her using only your voice, but as far as I can tell, there's no option for that in macOS 10.13.2. Possibly in a future update, but not right now, which is kind of unfortunate because this thing has 4 microphones up at the top near the webcam, so that would definitely be a cool feature to have. Fan noise is absolutely silent, and it's actually really hard to believe. It's funny because even though the iMac Pro uses virtually the same body and design as the standard 27-inch iMac, as well as the significantly faster hardware that's packed inside, you're actually getting a quieter machine compared to the iMac. As far as thermals are concerned, I didn't experience any thermal throttling during the overnight Monero mining, but granted, that was only maxing out 6 out of the 8 CPU cores available. To be fair though, it was running for like 10 straight hours, which is a little unrealistic, but even then it was averaging around 84 to 86 degrees Celsius and 77 degrees on the Vega 56, which isn't bad at all. Now, because this machine isn't geared for general consumers, I wish Apple cranked the fans on earlier and faster, because by keeping the processor's temperature well under control, it'll be able to sustain higher clock speeds for much longer, and frankly, I don't think professionals are going to complain about some slight fan noise in favor of better performance. Now so far, the iMac Pro is looking like a fantastic machine for professionals, but there's one thing that's holding this machine back from being a true workstation, and that's the upgradability. It's upgradable to an extent because the CPU, the memory, and the storage is not soldered onto the motherboard, and those 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports will definitely help, but it's nowhere near a custom-built PC with all the modular parts. Furthermore, the thermals won't be as good as an open case design with lots of airflow, and that's important because with the Mac Pro, that thing had a lot of overheating issues because Apple set the fans to spin up well after the CPU was starting to overheat, so a lot of people had fried logic boards. So should you buy the iMac Pro? Well, first of all, if you spent more than about 10 seconds contemplating whether or not to buy this thing, you're probably better off getting the standard 27-inch iMac, because if you're working with a lot of virtual machines, you're doing particle simulations, or you're working with raw video, and I'm making an assumption here, but I think you're going to be making well more than enough money to drop even $10,000 on this thing. There are some exceptions of course, but I wouldn't recommend spending this much money if you're not sure you need this kind of performance. And to reiterate, the iMac Pro and the standard iMac both have the exact same display, speakers, design, and both have pretty much the exact same SSDs. So I hope this video helped you in deciding whether or not the iMac Pro is right for you. Again, I'll have a dedicated video on video editing and gaming performance with the iMac Pro, but aside from that, thank you very much for watching. This is Infinity Labs, and we'll catch you guys later.